This is the Modern Man Essentials Podcast. Tune in for content related to all things masculine in today's modern age and journeying in mental, spiritual, physical, and relational balance and growth. Here's your host, Jared Nordstrom.
All right. Welcome back to the Modern Men Essentials Podcast, everybody. Today, we have a special guest for you. I am super excited to announce that we have Danny Vega here that we're interviewing. He's sharing his time with us. He's going to enlighten us with some awesome wisdom. And I know that you guys posted some questions in the group on what to ask him in regards to raising young boys into strong men and parenting in general. And I'm super excited to have him. I first kind of found out about Danny just through me being a podcast consumer, listening to different podcasts through Anthony Gustin's the Keto Questions Answers podcast, which is now called, oh, help me, Danny. What's his name?
Oh, he just changed it.
He changed it.
Yeah, he changed it. I remember when he was talking about
The Natural State, I think. Something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's real close to Paul's podcast too.
Yeah.
I forget it.
So there's a little free plug for Anthony Gustin. Then eventually, you guys know I'm into weightlifting and CrossFit as well, and went into the Ketogenic Athlete podcast once we discovered him. And then it just evolved. I think me and Danny kind of have a kindred heart here. He homeschools his two young boys. He's married. They are kind of running their own business. Breaking away from the standard 9-to-5 even before COVID hit, and being a good role model and a big, strong, positive influence to our culture. So Danny, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing, who you are. Hopefully I didn't take up too much of the spotlight for you.
Dude, honestly, thank you so much. That's a great intro, and I'm happy to be here. We spoke before we started recording about the fact that I'm very passionate. For those listening who don't know me, I'm very passionate about ketogenic diets, low carb diets, paleo, all of that, carnivore. And my main focus has been on performance. So when I started the ketogenic diet in 2016, I realized that there was so much information about keto, but there weren't really a lot of people exploring the performance side of it. So I was fortunate enough to meet Brian Williamson, and he interviewed me for his podcast. And after that interview, we decided that I had to be his co-host. And so that's been the majority of what I've been doing for the last 4 years, is focusing on mostly performance, nutrition, lifting, how to build muscle on a ketogenic diet, which is very misunderstood, because there's definitely some considerations with that, as well as, just the mindset side of things, and anything just fitness and nutrition related. But like I said before we started recording, if you want to get me going, if you want to get me really hyped, let's talk about parenting and unschooling, what we do with the boys, because that is by far my life's purpose, is raising men. I have my top five objectives in life. Number 3 is raising boys who become men of virtue, who with a heart for service, with high emotional intelligence. And so much of what I do every single day is geared towards that. And so having the opportunity to talk about it, it's what I live for. So I'm excited to be here, man.
That's awesome. So how did this happen for you guys? Were you homeschooled? Was Mauda homeschooled? Like, how did you guys come to this decision together?
That's a great story, because I think like a lot of the people who are listening now, who may be looking at homeschooling, it wasn't probably the first choice. I know that a lot of people right now, whether it's because they got a taste of it during the lockdown and they were like, hey, this is not so bad, or because, they're looking at all the things where, kids are going to go back to school and they have these weird guidelines that they're not cool with that. If this is you, welcome. I know it's scary, but we're going to navigate through that, and I can share that with you, because the whole first part of this is educating yourself to a point where you're no longer afraid, because that's the main thing, is that you're going to be afraid because society says that you need to go to school, you need it to for your kids social development. Your kid's never going to do well. How are they going to keep up? How are they going to do trigonometry? Like all this crap that's just nonsense. And so we stumbled upon it because my wife was like 7 months pregnant, and we started to think about, okay, let's think about this. What are we going to do when the baby's born? Are we going to put him in a daycare? She wasn't making that much money. She was working at a law firm at the time, and then we did the math, and we're like, okay, so basically you're gonna work so that we can pay for the daycare, and we'll have like a few extra dollars like from that. That doesn't make sense. So that's where our ears perked up, and we started to get just curious about homeschooling. And we were fortunate enough to find someone who's now one of our best friends, the libertarian homeschooler, Anna Martin. And Anna would post conversations that she had with her boys. She would share her approach, which, the typical person is going to look at homeschooling, and what I think, because this is how I viewed it, is basically you're on your kitchen table, and you're doing homework with your child, and you're censoring a bunch of stuff. You're keeping them away from the world. They're going to become awkward, all of this stuff. This is how I came into it, because this is kind of like how it's portrayed.
Mhm.
And Anna introduced us to this whole new world where it was the complete opposite. Our boys see more of the world. They know more. They actually know so much more, and they're exposed to so much more than they would have been at school. And it's, like I said, it's a complete opposite. Now, from the social side of things, you have to understand that if you grew up in an area and you had that awkward homeschool kid that everybody probably can identify with, um, that child was not awkward because they were homeschooled. They were likely homeschooled because they were socially awkward, or they had a learning disability that wasn't addressed in schools, or they didn't fit into that mold, which it's a very distinct mold. Like there's only really two ways of learning that are taught in schools, and we have dozens of styles of learning. And so if you're not in that style, you tend to be either remedial or awkward or whatever. They put you into another box, and that's just not the case. When we started to learn first about the origin of compulsory schooling, which I'm happy to talk about today if you want to, as well as you know what the intention of schools are. And this is, I'm just going by what the originators of there was something called the General Education Board, right around 1913, where they were the Rockefellers and a bunch of like the big financial giants of the time were thinking about, okay, how are we going to do this? We have a bunch of immigrants coming in. Not only do we have immigrants coming from different countries because of the opportunities here, but we also had a huge rural population that was moving out of the farm from that subsistence living into the factory work during the Industrial Revolution. And these people needed to be assimilated and educated. And so they basically set about to create some objectives. What are we going to do? What do we want for these people? And when you learn about those types of things, you look at school from a whole different standpoint, actual schooling, because compulsory schooling, which is basically the system that we have all around the world now, is really like less than 150 years old. A lot of our greatest minds were homeschooled. And when you look at it that way and you start to think about, okay, homeschooling seems to be the aberration nowadays, but in reality, historically, compulsory schooling is the aberration over time. So we started to learn about that, and the more we learned, we got through the first phase, which I think is important, which is get over yourself, kind of unschool yourself, and get over like your traumas and your whatever your misconceptions. But then it gets to the second challenge, which is how do you deal with other people? Because your family, your friends, everyone's going to tell you, especially at first, that you're crazy and that you're weird and all that stuff. And that can be very discouraging to people. So we went through all of those processes, and we would say to ourselves when Desmond was 3 or 4, um, right now, no one knows about the seeds that we're planting. No one can see the fruit that's growing from these seeds that we've planted. But one day people will see. One day they'll get it, you know. And then we started to get those confirmations when Desmond turned 5, and as he started to interact with more people, and like the fact that everybody who meets my sons tells me, wow, they're so socially developed, they're so polite, they look at you in the eye, they shake your hands, and they respect you. I'd love to talk about like how that came about, but that's basically where we are now, where, you know, when you've been doing this for almost a decade and you've done so much reading, and it's almost impossible to distill that into like one conversation, because it's a long journey that you have to go down. But let me just tell you guys, as someone who hasn't even seen the true fruits, which would be like the end, right? When they turn into adults, and the type of adults that they become, that even now it is so worth it. And especially now with everything going on in the world, this is, I view this as the best choice. Like we always say, like, oh, you don't want to be judgmental. They always say that, but judgmental, if I'm making a judgment, by definition, I'm going to say that my way is the best way. You know, that's just how it works, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I happen to believe that homeschooling and unschooling, while maybe not able to be done, you know, universally, are the best options for my family, you know? And kind of that's where we are now.
That's awesome. So would you say that there's certain values that you feel like you'll be able to instill more since you are doing homeschooling, unschooling, as a family, since you've started?
Yeah, I think that has to be part of the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
because like, what are your goals? So like for us, the first thing I thought of when you asked me that question was like, what are they teaching in schools, and what are we focusing on? And I'm not even talking about, let's forget about the moral side of things, which we can talk about, but like, well, actually, let's just start with that. For example, might as well, if I'm gonna mention it.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about the important conversations that we have to have, like the sex conversation, the sex conversation then goes into the consent conversation and rape, and then it goes into, you know, a bunch of stuff, you know, like exploring, you know, all of the aspects of sexuality. I want to be the one to teach that to my kids, you know what I mean? Because I know what level of development they're in, and so we focus a lot on child development. We have to, when you're a homeschooler, you tend to become an expert in brain development, child development. You start to learn about, you know, what's appropriate, what's age appropriate behavior, what's appropriate to even teach them at certain ages, when you know that there's specific areas of the brain that aren't ready for that. Like teaching a 5-year-old, for example, to read, unless they're gifted and truly just take to reading naturally like that, is absurd, because it's just memorization, and they don't even know the words that they're parroting back. But like that one aspect is the moral aspect, which obviously I want to be the one to have those conversations. But the values, like, what do we value in life? I don't care about testing. I don't care about like these arbitrary benchmarks that they have to do certain things at certain ages. I care about, is my child emotionally intelligent? Does my child have a good morning routine? They don't teach that in school. You
Mm-hmm.
know, does my child have tools that he can use to manage stress and um, to resolve conflict peacefully without an adult? You know, because if you go to school, or, you know, certain parenting styles as well, is all about, well, find someone with authority, because that person's going to fix your problem. If Jimmy's not sharing his thing, well, let me find an adult and they'll make Jimmy share. That's not how you do things in life. And that's why a lot of the time we have this Karen culture. For example, now someone's offended by something someone else is doing, and I need an adult. Where's the adult? I need someone to step in. And that's not how we resolve conflict peacefully. So, I want my sons to be able to have conversations with people they don't agree with, and be able to articulate themselves. So we do like Philosophy Fridays. That's something that we focus on. I want my sons to have good manners. I want my sons to know what they love, explore what they love. That's such a big part of why we unschool, is because you're in school for 14 years, and then at some point around the 12th, 13th, and 14th year, that's when they start to talk about your future. And it's not even talking about your passions, how what problems you're gonna solve in the world, how you're gonna uniquely add value to the world. You're talking about colleges and majors. And then all of a sudden now you've been your whole life asking for permission to go to the bathroom, and all of a sudden and taught to think a certain way, and all of a sudden you're supposed to be more independent at this point, and you're supposed to know what you want. There's a huge disconnect there, because you didn't spend any time exploring who you are, what you love. And unschooling allows us to do all of that. And we always say, like, we don't ever say, what are you going to be when you grow up? That's nonsense. Like, what do you want to solve right now? And we can do it right now. Desmond had his first company when he was 4 years old. He wanted a bearded dragon, and he thought of the name of the company, which is the cutest thing ever. And I told him, please make this what's Warren Buffett's umbrella company? I forget the name of I forget the name of it. Like, make that your umbrella company. And he called it Galaxy Dreamcatchers. And Galaxy Dreamcatchers was basically a business where, at the time, Desmond was doing soccer at the YMCA. He would pick up sticks from the location, bring them home, paint them. We did buy him a few things like feathers and things from Amazon, and he sold hundreds of dollars of Dreamcatchers. And he was able to buy himself his first, his bearded dragon. He bought himself the terrarium, everything he needed with the money he made. And these are all things that, this is why homeschooling and unschooling, they go into every aspect and area of life. Like, because life is not, you go to school and you go home. Life is learning is natural. And, exploring what you love, exploring who you are, is all part of that. And we are able to do that with homeschooling.
That's so awesome. I like what you talked about, because when I remember going to high school, was trying to read all my textbooks or turn in these sheets. But what I've been seeing with my kids is the opportunities of hands-on learning, bringing them places, having them come up with their ideas, the daily life skills of right now, our kids' ages, they're fighting a lot. And I think part of it may be due to not being able to go as many places as we used to. So they get a little stir crazy. But it's brought up a great opportunity of, guys, I had to explain to my firstborn what a tattletale was. I said, I really don't want you to be somebody that needs to have somebody else solve your problem. I want you to teach your sister how to have a conversation and come to agreement and solve the problem together. And important. I mean, and it's been a long, painful process, but these past few days, we've been seeing the fruits of it, and just these little glimpses where you feel like all your blood, sweat, and tears, and enduring all these little wine sessions and little scream sessions where they're actually having these little successes. And I just don't remember having those opportunities in regular school. And by all means, everybody on the show, this is not a bash to teachers or anybody in that field. We have lots of friends who are teachers, and they're great people. A lot of our friends who were teachers now homeschool, ironically, and we've had teachers who tell us what we're doing is what they would do if they could do it. And I believe the people that we know have a passion, but sometimes it's hard to invest when you have so many people to account for. And that's one of the things with the regular school system too, is sometimes there's so many people that they're trying to serve that they aren't able to invest deeply. They have to invest broadly. Um, and so a lot of those opportunities for life skills and the social connections and the social learning gets lost. And then there's so many, you go into all the different learning styles and how kids have different varying needs, that kind of thing. So by all means, it's no bash, but I truly believe that um, your kids are a product of what the voice in their life has been. And just from me being a dad, when I first had my son, I really wanted to be a major voice of his male role model in a positive sense, as somebody that he could look up to. And that meant for me just spending as much time with him as I could. I have that opportunity, and homeschooling was just kind of one of those things too, where we could have more of that opportunity to do that.
I love that so much, man. It's so true, dude. Like that there's no test that can quantify that. There's, there's so much. And let me just spell something out in case people are wondering. There's a really good study that came out in 2010 by the Homeschool Legal Defense Fund for people who are kind of data driven and looking at numbers, and just understand a few things. Number one, there was no statistical difference in the way the children performed if the parents were college educated or not. There was no statistical difference between children whose parents spent more than $600 a year or less than $600 a year. There's all these different things. You start to learn about all of the things that we think would usually make someone maybe less likely to succeed, for example, is out the window because of there's something magical that happens when you homeschool. Like it's just so much. It's so much more, I guess I would say.
That's awesome. Maybe after the show, you have to give me that where you got that info, because I like, for people
Yeah,
who like the data, I like data too, to share that in the show notes.
yeah. I'll send that to you.
Sweet. So one of the things we kind of touched on with this was when we talked about values. You get to instill values with being able to homeschool. And I don't want this podcast to be so much about just homeschooling, but as kind of parenting and developing young men. Homeschooling gives you and me the opportunity to have a big investment and opportunity in that. But one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, how do you see mainstream culture defining masculinity? And does that align with your definition of masculinity?
Well, the way I see it, and I don't think there's much of an argument against it, is the modern view of masculinity is perfectly embodied in every single pop culture reference to fathers and men. Homer Simpson, what's his name from Family Guy? Peter Griffin. It's usually the bumbling, overweight, idiot who can't do anything without his wife, and who's just kind of just a mediocre dude, and I have a problem with that, because my wife, I'm her biggest fan, and she's my peer, and I love her, but at the same time, I view, masculinity as, masculinity, there's the toxic masculinity thing is just such a misnomer for me, because when you start to break it down and look at the things that they're talking about, I'm like, wait, that's not masculine, that's not masculine, that's not masculine, that's no longer masculinity. To me, a man is a leader in their community. He's a driven person. He's compassionate. He is humble. He has a heart of service. These are the things that I'm teaching my boys of, when it comes to, like, what it is to be a man and how to be a good man. And beyond talking to them about it, I live it, the way I treat my wife, the way I treat women in my life, and the way they see me interacting with people. that's a huge part of all of this. And when you're spending so much time with your kids, they really get a better look at who you are, and they're learning so much more that way than just by, what we tell them. They might remember a phrase or something you mentioned, or a lesson that you went into, like, but in reality, they are taking their social cues from you. And one of the reasons why I love homeschooling, just kind of getting off of this subject a little bit, but kind of along the same lines, is for example, like in a school situation, and by the way, totally agree. My wife's 5 of her best friends are teachers. So, this has nothing to do with teachers. This has everything to do with a system that I just don't think is designed well. It's a management system. When you have 340 million people that you have to manage, you have to do something. You have to standardize things. And when you think about like schooling in general, I think of like a school of fish. Like you got to keep them all together. You can't have one going out too far in the front. You can't have anybody too far in the back. So you got to kind of keep them together. And that's why a lot of the time it doesn't do well, because you have all these different types that can't be boxed in like that. But on the social side of it, when your child is segregated by age, as they do in school, which doesn't happen anywhere else in life. I'm working with people who are 50, I'm working with people who are 20. They tend to only get their social cues from one person, and that is the child that is their age, who doesn't know crap about crap, who doesn't know anything about life. And you start to see cliques, you start to see the child changing who they are to kind of fit in, versus like our way of doing things is like, I have, for example, he sees what I'm doing a lot of the time, but let's say he goes to a homeschool co-op. Now he's with kids that are maybe like a few years younger than him, a few years older than him. The older kids naturally step into this responsibility of being like a mentor to the child. And then the younger kids learn. And then as the younger kids get older, they become that mentor. But then they're also getting their social cues from the adults in the room. And there's always like a better ratio that way as well. Like you got a school of 10 kids or like a co-op of 10 kids, you might have 3 adults in the room, and then you have all these different ages. And that's how I think we get the best social development. That's actually part of that study is like socialized. I always laugh about the socializing thing, because it's like, first of all, I was a very social person and I was punished for socializing. Like they said very clearly, we're not here to socialize, and that's the first thing people ask about is like, well, how are they going to socialize? Well, they're gonna interact with their friends, and they're gonna interact with me, and it's just a much more robust education that they're getting from a social aspect. But for some reason, it's been one of those things that people always go to,
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard that argument for many times. And yeah, my wife was homeschooled, and obviously I didn't have any hard time socializing with her. And you alluded it before. Sometimes it's not homeschooling. It's been the problem for socialization. Sometimes it is. I mean, there's a wrong way to do everything.
Yeah,
right?
I totally agree with that. That's a good point.
But there's always deeper things going on too. So kind of on the idea of showing your kids, modeling masculinity, has there been any prime examples or where like current events or something happened out in public and you would have to talk to your kids like to show them that that wasn't the right way, or that wasn't how a man is supposed to act or treat a woman? Or is there any examples like that where you've had to have kind of like a serious conversation or navigate through that?
Yeah, this was actually that's a good one, because last fall Desmond was 8 years old, and Maura and I always joke because we are so unique in the sense that we're Christian anarchists, like libertarian, like anarchist type of people, like hippie, peaceful, freedom loving weirdos who are also Christian and who also practice peaceful parenting. And so what ends up happening, which is interesting, is that we have our Christian friends who come from a much more authoritarian point of view when it comes to parenting and homeschooling, and how if they're gonna homeschool their child, it's gonna be different than the way we do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have our non-Christian friends who may align with us a little bit better on the parenting side because they're less authoritarian, but then maybe we don't agree with some of the things they do. Like maybe, for example, like they want to introduce like transgender like at a young age, which I just don't think is the right time. Um, but because of all the different groups of people that we hang out with, and this doesn't even have to be because of the people that we met in this homeschool co-op versus that homeschool co-op. In general, your child is going to play with kids on the block. They're going to play with kids on their sports teams, and they're going to have conversations, and things are going to come up. And if you are mindful and you're present and you have that relationship with your child, they're going to share what they learn about, right? So Desmond started asking about sex when he was 8, and I was like, where is this coming from? Because I remember having the conversation, he asked about conception when he was 6, and I was like, oh, okay, that's easy, let's talk about that. A sperm goes into an egg, and that's how that happens. And very like not really talking about the fact that a penis is going to go into a vagina. Like we didn't have to go that route yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was satisfied with that answer for 2 years with the conversation we had. And I was like, okay, 2 more years. And then finally he asked about sex. And I was away, actually. I was at a speaking engagement, and he asked Maura about it, and she texted me. By the way, I just had to have the sex conversation this morning. And that was a perfect example of what you're asking, because she asked him where he had heard about it, and one of his friends was talking about sex, and it was obvious that the child had been exposed to porn, which, by the way, the average age is about 8 years old when kids are exposed to porn. That's how ubiquitous it is. That's how easy to access it is. And so that was the time to really have a conversation that started with what sex is. But then we were like, okay, this is what sex is, straight up. Penis in the vagina, that's what happens. That's what, and it's getting over that initial shock, like, oh my gosh, but then when you have that conversation, you have to go into how do we view sex? And, as Christians, how do we define sex? And how does God in our worldview define sex? And we had to go into that, like when does sex, what is sex? Is it a good thing? Absolutely. It's an amazing thing. A man and a wife having sex is like every single day, go for it. That's why we were created beyond just for procreation, for pleasure. We have sex for pleasure. But then it had to move into, after that, talking about consent. Like you automatically get into that conversation because you're like, you have to understand that you're a man, you're going to have these impulses, and you're going to have testosterone, especially when you're going through puberty. And the most important thing is that the person that you are trying to initiate it with is consenting, because a lot of people, we had to go into the rape conversation. And then, of course, when we go into that, then we're going to have to talk about porn. So it's like all of these things that we were able to do just because he heard about sex. But the reason he heard about sex was because the child was exposed to porn. So we had to talk about porn. And, even without getting into the moral side of all of this with respect to porn, we were just using it as an opportunity to teach him, like, this is what porn does to your brain. It obviously, it basically, like Dave Asprey says, that porn is the high fructose corn syrup of sex.
Mm-hmm.
It turns your brain into that addict brain where we're just looking for that dopamine response, and we're constantly doing that. And it's totally different than if we were to actually have sex, where instead of dopamine, we're seeing huge surges in oxytocin. And beyond that, like, what does it do to relationships? Did you know that it causes erectile dysfunction? Like, you have to continue to stimulate yourself more by watching crazier porn and all that stuff. So all of this whole thing, all that to say that, like, life is going to have a bunch of opportunities for you to talk about these things with your child, and you got to be mindful. And it's also a great way because your child is not going to always be with you. You have to understand on one side, that's how it works. They're free, and you want to teach them, so that when they're out on their own, they can make the right decisions. But then you can also take that as an opportunity to be like, listen, this is what society is saying right now, and we don't agree with that. We don't accept that. And that's another just very powerful thing about homeschooling.
That's so awesome. I There's so much in there that I just loved. First of all, I just relate where you don't fit in one box of people. Um, we have like Christian beliefs, and we're trying to instill that into our kids, but we don't always necessarily align so right-sided. We don't always align. We're a little bit too left for the right. We're a little bit too right for the left. We're a little bit libertarian. Um, and we're studying the Jewish Bible because we really want to learn the history and the culture and all that stuff. But then just when it comes to the culture, like we're trying to navigate our way through all these different things. And one thing that I love that you've been saying so far is being able to talk to people and have valuable conversations. And this goes to the life skill of just socialization. Is even if you're with somebody, or if your kid is with somebody that might be different from we are, or have different beliefs, that person, that kid can still see them as a person with inherent value. And then if they have learned something that might be different from what you believe, or even perverted in something that is concerning, that your kid has that value and that trust to come to you and talk to you. And I think that in itself is super great, and just a fruit of what you've been cultivating in that relationship with your boys. And I think that's something, and I don't want to rabbit trail too much here, with just the idea of breaking the part of the family, of just with a lot of different things that have been going on recently. And the
Yeah,
idea of
yeah, I'm
technology,
right there with you.
and the idea of technology, and how soon porn is being exposed to children, and how technology can really, in a sense, divide family, because you have these devices in front of your faces all the time at younger ages, with the whole possibilities are endless of what they might be exposed to. And there's that temptation of, um, who am I going to talk to about these things? My friends, which I can message instantly, or the person I know that cares about me the most, my parents. Um, so I thought I really appreciate all that stuff that you shared with us. I know that was probably kind of a life-changing conversation with your son, and I trying to figure out when that conversation is going to happen.
You'll know when it presents
Yeah.
itself, because like
Okay.
we weren't saying now's the time, we just kind of like, I guess now is the time, because it presented
Sure.
itself. I just want to say one thing real quick, what you said. I think that's so important, for the child to be grounded in their relationship with us. Like, children nowadays are under so much stress, like between the social media part of it, which by definition, there's no way that you can't not compare yourself, to the other kids and what they're doing and what's going on. And then the testing that happens in schools, like all the pressures that they're going through. They need to know that at home they're safe, and there's a relationship that's based on trust. And so this is why it's so important to like give your child that freedom and that autonomy, and just be very present, because that's how you build trust, and that's how they're going to be turning to you first when they have these questions, because they're not going to be like, oh, I don't want to talk about that with my dad because I'm embarrassed, or he's going to look at me a certain way. Let me just talk to Jimmy, who doesn't know crap about crap, and he's going to tell me his little definition that he's come up with in his 10 years of existence. you know
Hmm.
that's how we do it. We do it by loving them, and giving them all that love and that autonomy, but then at the same time showing to them that we have the answers. Like a perfect example, it's all in what you say. Like if your child is on the counter and you say, get down, get down, you're going to get hurt. That is way different than saying, hey, listen, if you fall from that height, it's going to hurt. Okay. I just want you to know that if you fall from that height, it's going to hurt. And then when they do it and they fall from that height, okay, exhibit A, mommy told me about that when I was younger, and I learned from that. And then we keep on kind of sharing those things with them. And then after several examples, they're going to be like, you know what, maybe I should listen to what they're saying, because maybe they know something. That's how you do it. It can't be the other way. It can't be where you have this environment of like, do it because I said so and all this stuff, because what you're teaching them is basically like to hide behavior and to hide subjects that they think that they're going to get in trouble if they bring them up. So sorry, I just had to mention that.
No, that's great. Natural consequences. It's a great teacher.
Oh,
I love that example too of, if I have a conversation with Bennett, Dad doesn't think you should sit on the counter. Is there any reasons why you might think that? And you get them thinking about it.
Yes.
Or having your kids, sometimes if they do something wrong, what do you think the consequence should be? And sometimes you'll be blown away at how harsh they can be with them.
I know.
It's
Desmond's
like,
the same. Like I've done that.
Okay.
Like, dang, I wouldn't have done that, man. Come on.
Yeah, for real. That's good stuff. So kind of based on what we were talking about, so you used to work a pretty standard 9-to-5 job. And now you're pretty much out of that world, if I'm understanding correctly. And you are pretty much, social media is pretty much your platform of what you do, correct?
Yeah. I was a medical device. Well, I was my first career, I was a college strength and conditioning coach for VCU. I was the head coach for VCU basketball. Just amazing experience, having gone to the NCAA tournament, and the local paper wrote about me, like what I did to change their conditioning and just all of that. Very special time, but I wasn't making a lot of money. So after 2 years of doing that, I moved back to Miami and I started pharmaceutical sales, did that for 3 years, and then realized that my expiration date was coming up, because had I worked more than 3 years in pharma, it was going to be that much harder for me to break into medical device, which was the main goal. So I got out and I did medical device for the remaining 8 years that I was in corporate America. And in September of 2018, quit my job. But in reality, I had decided in June of 2017 that I was going to quit my job. So I spent a year preparing myself for that financially, growing my platform. And like you said, social media and the internet is the main reason I was able to do that. It's why I have clients in Czech Republic, India, Costa Rica, people all over the world, because of this beautiful thing, that this double-edged sword that is social media and the internet. That's why I was able to quit my job in 2018. So yeah, social media is huge part of what I do.
Yeah. And it's obviously working, because you haven't had to work standard 9-to-5 for a while, and it's really expanding your network, and they provide a lot of opportunities for you guys. And I'm sure it's provided you some freedom of choice of your time, which is freaking awesome. But as things get pushed more towards that side of things in business, and as our age gets more technological, as somebody who is involved with technology for your living, basically now, how do you like control that, moderate that, and teach your kids about that?
That's such a good thing you brought up, man, because we've evolved in our thinking when it comes to this. Because when we were younger, and the boys were very young, we instantly pushed back against people who wanted to cut screen time and just dictate what their kids did with technology. Because we were, like I said before, everybody goes into it for a different reason. Like, for us, we weren't homeschooled. So a lot of the time you're going to have those people that tend to go swing the pendulum the complete opposite direction. So it's like total freedom, and all that stuff. That's where we were at the time. We were always like, oh, there's no reason to limit screen time. This is how they learn nowadays and all this stuff. And then as we learned more, first of all, we learned about, the addictive tendencies, like how these screens turn their brains very similar to what porn does, like that's that new stimuli and, just a different type of stimulus that is just cheaper, quicker, flashier, and that's when we changed our minds and we started to really define like the screen time more. We learned, like for example, we had our friend on our podcast, our friend Jenny, who's an occupational therapist, and you see such a prevalence of like autistic kids and kids with all types of neurological disorders. And one of the things she does that's super effective is a 2-week screen detox.
Oh.
And the fact that she can get a child, and this is a true story, by the way, a child with a crazy tic that is like, you're seeing this tic like every couple of moments. The fact that she could, with that simple protocol of cutting off screens for 2 weeks, eliminate that tic completely. That was when we were like, okay, this is powerful. So how do we view it now? Well, we do not really do screens at all during the daytime. So that has been a little bit different with the lockdown because, like I said before the lockdown, we had homeschool co-ops. We had Mauro would take the kids to Lifetime, to the gym, and the kids, Lifetime Kids Academy is amazing. Like they do Tai Chi and they do stuff all the time. It's very enriching. So imagine 3 hours a day with that, and then 3 hours a week with STEAM class, like science, technology, engineering, art, math, 1 hour a week chess club, jujitsu every afternoon, all of these things that would give us a break and still enrich their lives. But then the lockdown happens and then that all becomes virtual and now there is no break. And so we're together all the time. So screen time went up a little bit with that, and then on one hand, I don't like that because I know the damage that screens can do, the type of like what that does to GABA versus butyrate. We know that butyrate in the brain is very excitatory. GABA is calming. And when you're watching these screens, like you're all butyrate, like you're very, this is why if you look at it, the quick cuts during the cartoons and like, everything's like quick, fast cuts and flashy things and colors and all this stuff. And so for that reason, we don't do screens during the day. And it's how you approach it. It's like anything, like when you say it a certain way, it comes off better. So since we're so focused on autonomy, and this is a huge part of like how we parent, and we know that a child's need for autonomy will supersede even his best interests, meaning that, we all know the kid who has like 2-hour limits on how many times he can play, how often he can play video games, but then he goes to a sleepover at his friend's house and he stays up all night playing video games because he can, and that's against his best interest. Like he should be sleeping, but he does it because he can, and then when he goes back home, he knows that he's gonna. So we don't approach it, and we kind of sell them on our way of doing it, which is during the daytime, we don't really do screens. And during the daytime, go outside. It's a beautiful day outside, go outside. And that's how we would say it. Like if they want to look for their iPad, we would say, oh, but look how beautiful it is outside. Why don't you guys go outside? And usually that's pretty easy. They do it. If they do kind of push back, then we have, for example, the iPad, we have, I don't know if you know this, you could put screen limits. So they could be on it for 15 minutes and then it'll send me a text and ask me if I want to give it more time, or they lock the screen. So that's how we do it. Social media accounts for kids, that's a Pandora's box. We've created Fat Fueled Kids for the boys, but in reality, we're the owners and managers of that account until we feel they're old enough, because there's a lot of weirdos and sickos out there, and there's a lot of catfish out there that we're teaching them about this, but they still don't know. So we have to like provide that guidance and that those training wheels until we feel like they're socially developed enough to be out on their own completely. So I think that
Mhm.
answered the question, and I think I covered every part of social media and technology. But it's something that in general we think is useful, and we
Mhm.
think that we shouldn't be overbearing, but at the same time we have to understand that we know more than them. And just like we do with food, where we talk about what's optimal, what's not optimal, and we don't ever buy them crappy food. We say, if you
Mhm.
want to buy that crappy chocolate bar, filled with all the crap in it, then you're gonna have to buy that with your own money. That's just how we do it.
Yeah. I know you guys have been very good too with your parenting style about how you sometimes let your kids make those choices and you explain to them, if you do this, you might not feel as great afterward, but you can try it and make your own decision. And we have done that with our kids too. Sometimes they've had a little too much screens. And then I kind of remind them, I say, why do you think you're feeling this way? And then I'll be like, because I watch too many videos on the TV or whatever, that kind of thing. And it's just helping them even become more self-aware, because sometimes you can't avoid it all completely, but
Yep.
being cognizant of it, I think is super awesome. I think how you guys are doing it is awesome too.
Thanks, man.
And like everything with parenting is a journey, right?
Yeah,
And
man. Just when you think you got it locked down, they hit a whole different stage of development, and now
mhm,
you got to go learn again. It's always like that. And man, we've made mistakes, but look, when we make these mistakes, number one, the good news is if you got two kids, you won't make the same mistake twice.
mhm,
And Brian and I, when we did the ketogenic athlete, we used to joke about the fact that you know we're all going to give our kids neuroses. We're just going to have to probably pick and choose which ones we give them, because there's no getting around it.
absolutely. All right, I know our time is kind of wrapping up here, but I want to give you a bonus question, and I already kind of know the answer, but I want to hear you talk about it. Um, how important is your and Mauda's relationship to you being a man and being a father?
Oh man, that's a great one. Yeah, like honestly, it goes back to what I said before about like your child will learn so much more by how you live your life and how you treat others than anything you ever say. They're gonna trust me. They're not capable of compartmentalizing you saying treat women this way and then you completely going against that. Kids are their view of the world is so much so much closer to black and white than ours is, because they're just more pristine. They haven't been exposed to things, so they don't. It's easy for them to like to see what justice is, and like if you're telling them to do something, and you're doing the opposite, they spot that right away. So not only does it completely make your message just not worth anything, because they're not going to learn it. Now they're going to be like, they might even question everything, because they're like, if he's telling me this and this is not how the world is, like what is real and what is true? Like maybe none of it matters. So with respect to my wife, like I just do the things that I think they should be doing. Like number one, you hold the door open for women. You're chivalrous and you compliment your wife, and I do the dishes every night. Like I cook for us every night. Like I do a lot of things that they see every single day. And then I tell them, I tell them all the time, like, I really hope you guys can find someone like your mother. And I tell them all the reasons why I love their mother. And like they're naturally gonna probably gravitate towards someone that's like their mother, but when you're actually being intentional about it, even more of a reason that they're gonna be like, wow, what my parents have is special, and I want that. And so they see my wife and I as a team, and they're gonna see that, and they're gonna look for someone who's like that. And then when they do find someone, they are going to approach the relationship the smart way. Like I have a friend, for example, who was married for 7 years before they realized that there were some huge questions that were never answered before the wedding. And they were like basically like game changers that basically would not make them compatible at all. And so my boys are gonna know, like, I'm probably gonna want someone who knows about nutrition, because I'm not gonna have that argument with my wife about how to feed my kids. I'm probably gonna want someone who's open to homeschooling, because I just, based on my experience, I don't agree with homeschooling. So like all of those things are important. And I think it's going to help them too, because I don't think there's many things in this world that are sexier or more attractive to a woman than a guy who's like thinking about the future and thinking about, like, where do you want to be in 5 years? How do you want to raise your kids? Like all of those things are going to be things that I think they're going to have in their mind. And that is in general, I think something that women look for, a guy who's thinking about the future, who's thinking about his plans and what he wants for himself, what he wants for his kids. So that's huge.
That's so awesome. Um, and talking about your guys' relationship, I know you guys are very involved parents. Your relationship is a model to your boys, and it's also something that helps instill your values and helps make homeschooling better, because you guys are a team. You're not just one person. You guys complement each other in your strengths, and that's a huge thing. I know you guys have been recently on this kind of new adventure. And most people who listen to my podcast know that I talk about sponsors to the show at the beginning of the show, but I wanted to save it a little bit for the end for Danny, because Danny's donating his time for us. I'm not paying him, but I want to talk to you guys, or let him give a plug about what they're doing for their business, Rock Body Retreats. And it has to do with travel. And it's something, if you are about life experience and either as a couple want to go on trips, or, as family to give your kids these life experiences, it sounds like a great opportunity. I'm going to put it in the show notes, but Danny, can you just tell us a little bit of what that's about?
Oh, thanks, brother. Yeah, man. When we saw this idea in February, like, we had our friends, presented it to us, and 5 minutes in, we were like all in, because, this whole lifestyle, we don't see it as like separate. We see the parenting, the nutrition, the fitness, the travel. They're all part of a very involved system that all builds on itself. Like, why do we love travel? Well, for our kids, we love the whole, what's their name? The Bucket List family. Have you ever seen them?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We're huge fans of the Bucket List family, and we've stolen kind of their three top priorities when it comes to travel. And that is adventure, which is basically exposing our children to new things that make themselves uncomfortable and challenge them, like maybe some zip lining in Costa Rica, or, swimming with the whales, or, things like that just American kids in general don't really do a lot of. And when you travel the world, you're able to do that, and that builds more resilience. But then the other thing is culture, immersing ourselves in different cultures around the world. And what does that do? Oh my gosh, it completely destroys ignorance. It allows you to see humans for who they are, instead of dehumanizing them and throwing them into groups like, this is what Arabs are like. No, that's not true. I was actually in Dubai, and I met a bunch of Arab kids, like that's that part. And then and service, and so we do volunteering, and we serve here locally, but we also do volunteerism trips. And the company that we got involved with does all of that for us. And we were able to launch a new business within that business that basically takes travel and fitness, and it's basically all about fitness, family, fun, and travel, and putting that all together. And so we're doing the first of what's going to be many retreats. It's called Rock Body Retreats, like you said. And our first one is in Tulum, Mexico. We are putting it on with some amazing influencers. Todd Abrams, who is the CEO of Icon Meals. Hopefully he'll be coming. TJ Hoban, the most photographed, cover model the last 20 years, his fiance, Caroline DeCampos, pro bodybuilder, and some keto influencers like my boy Goody Beats. He's going to be with us. And it's basically an all-inclusive vacation that is in Tulum, Mexico, August 19th to the 23rd. We're going to go train at Tulum Jungle Gym. We're going to do the Ninja Warrior course at the Hard Rock Riviera Maya. We're going to have an on-site photographer so people can, like I'm doing a cut, so I can be at my best and do a photo shoot there. We're going to have a videographer. We're going to have workouts, team workouts, nutrition seminars, masterminds, all this stuff. And how do we benefit from it and how do we make money from it? We basically, it's a travel club. So these people have to buy this membership to get them the price, because the price for this trip is $839 for 5 days. And just to go to the Hard Rock Riviera Maya for those 5 days would be $1,600, let alone all the stuff that we put in. That's, all inclusive meal and beverage, endless resort credit, which basically means that you can get a massage every single day, rent out the cabanas, rent out the paddle boards, and all you got to pay is gratuities. All of that is thrown into it, into this $839 price that, if we price these things out separately, would be a $2,700 trip for one person. And we're able to do that because we're part of this travel club, and that's how we make money. Is we sell anyone who wants to come the subscription, and it's $25 a month, and that's it. And they save 30 to 80% off of hotels, cars, flights, rental cars. It's just a very cool business. It's a great way to make some money on the side, and it's completely in line with who we are. And so we're just super excited about it. And so I will share. We have a free document that if people go and give us their email to get updates on the trip, they'll get our guide to staying fat fueled on the road, which basically shows how do you approach restaurants when you're on the road with your kids? Like what are your favorite snacks that you're going to bring? We have like discount codes for all of that. What are the type of workouts that you can do with the family? It's just a really cool free document that people can have. And then they can kind of connect with us that way.
That's awesome. So anybody who feels strongly about travel, wants to get into travel, providing the opportunities for family to have those life experiences, even the fitness aspect, you guys check it out. I'll give some of the information in the show notes, and take advantage of Danny's opportunity, because like I said, it helps him out. He's got a great mission, and if you appreciate any of the content you've heard today, go ahead and check them out. All right. I know our time is up, but this is the closing question I always do with everybody I have on the podcast is, what are you doing today to develop yourself into a better man?
Today specifically, great question. This week, actually, totally all this week, it's not just today. My focus, because I basically am giving myself a different focus every week of this cut, which I just started last week. I'm doing a 90-day cut to get ready for this trip that I just mentioned. This week is all about my night routine, because I have an amazing morning routine that has been really well developed over the last 5 years, and I've been consistent with it, but I'm terrible with my evening routine. So I'm going to be much more intentional with my evening routine this week. Basically doing that second meditation at night, taking my nighttime supplements, cutting off my meals a little bit earlier, because a lot of the time by the end of the day, your willpower's zapped. Like you ain't got nothing left because you worked so hard all day and just creating more structure in the evenings is how is what I'm focusing on this week. And again, it's one of those areas that I get lazy on, and so that's basically what I'm doing now.
That's awesome. Danny, you were like the embodiment of what this podcast is about. It's about living life in all aspects to try and just get the most out of life as a man. So physical, mental, spiritual, everything. Where can we find you at? Where can my listeners look you up and follow your content?
DannyVega.ms on Instagram. You can find that also on Facebook. And then for our podcast, our shop, anything that the blog, it's www.fatfueled.family.
That's awesome. Well, Danny, thanks again for your time. And maybe we'll have you and Mauda on someday, and we'll have another episode and talks about some different topics.
For sure, brother. I'd love to be back.
All right. Thanks. All right, guys, that's all for today. Thanks again for tuning in for today's show. I hope you loved the content. If you did, please do me a favor and go to iTunes or whatever podcast platform you're listening to and give us a review. Also, consider sharing us with someone else that you think would enjoy this content. But until next time, be the best you that you can be and stay manly.